You plan for a normal week. Inbox zero-ish. Gym bag in the trunk. Payday Friday. Then your phone lights up with an offer you've prayed for. Title bump. Real money, the work you actually want. There's only one catch to take it. You must sign away something costly. Relocate in 10 days. Break a lease. Miss your sister's wedding. The doors open, therefore your stomach drops. The people you love won't understand. Your mind does the math. Opportunity on one side, pain on the other. You hover over the accept button and whisper, "Why does calling feel like a wound before it feels like a win?" Roll the camera back. Dust blue afternoon in Lystra. Clay walls hold their breath. Market voices fade to a hum. A quiet young man carries a sloshing bucket. Therefore his sandals print crescents in the road. His name is Timothy. He is faithful but overlooked. Steady but split down the middle. Jewish mother, Greek father. The labels don't agree. The neighbors aren't sure. He does the next right thing while wondering if there will ever be a next bigger thing. You know that ache. The ache that says, there must be more, and then adds, but maybe not for me. How does a life like his turn into a life that matters? Not with a parade, but with preparation. The camera slips inside the house he shares with two women of prayer. Before any apostle speaks, a grandmother hums the Psalms while kneading bread. A mother recites stories while mending clothes. Hidden repetitions shape a public backbone. They sow truth into chores, therefore his conscience grows tall in small rooms. The world does not clap for unseen faithfulness, but heaven watches the practice tapes. This is where callings learn to stand before they learn to run. Still restlessness prowls. Timothy feels it most at night when the wind whistles through the roof cracks and the city finally quiets. He thinks about the men in the scrolls who heard God not second-hand, but directly, and his chest tightens. He is good, but he wants God. He is respectful, but he wants purpose. He watches his friends count coins and plan trades. He counts hours and prays questions. Is there a voice for me? If so, will I recognize it? He does not know that recognition grows in soil called silence. Then, history leans in. A scarred preacher named Paul returns to the same streets that once bled him. He does not wear fame, he wears marks. His voice is not theatrical, it's urgent. He opens his mouth and the message crackles like kindling catching at last. Jesus crucified and risen. Grace offered, pride challenged. People shift in their sandals. Timothy listens from the shade, and the words line up with what his mother taught, therefore something ancient wakes inside him. It's like hearing your name from a distance and realizing it's not a coincidence. Soon whispers ripple through the believing community. Tell me about the young man, Paul says. The question finds Timothy, the way lightning finds a tall tree. A neighbor runs to the doorway. The apostle wants to see you. A bucket sloshes. Knees go light. Childhood doubts form a picket line across his heart. Not whole enough, not pure enough, not ready enough. He could freeze, he could flee. Instead he walks. Not because fear leaves, but because obedience arrives. That's the sneaky miracle of faith. Knees still knock, therefore feet still move. At the threshold, he will hear a sentence that slices straight through the fog. Are you ready to walk? Not, are you impressive? Not, is your resume spotless? Not, do the gatekeepers approve? The question is movement-shaped. The invitation is road-shaped. The cost is real. For Timothy, the path to preaching will start with pain, removing a barrier so others can hear. That may sound harsh until you see the love beneath it, a willingness to carry hurt so strangers won't have to carry stumbling blocks. Before we step into that room with him, pause the frame on your life. Maybe your room is an email draft, a conversation you dread, a form you need to file a goodbye you don't want to say. You are counting cost because Jesus told honest people to do exactly that, measure the weight before you lift it. Counting cost is not doubt, it's discipleship. You can want joy and still accept pain. You can feel unready and still be chosen. You can be divided by background, but wholehearted in response. Here is the paradox. Episode 1 wants to put in your hands. Preparation looks boring until the day it looks brilliant. Quiet faith builds a spine that can carry a yes. Calling rarely begins on a stage. It begins in a kitchen, a back room, a late-night whisper. Therefore, when the knock finally comes, the question will not be, can you explain everything, but will you take the first step? Timothy will. Not because he stops trembling, but because love for people and loyalty to Jesus weigh more than his fear. The bucket stops dripping. The door is open. A scarred mentor waits. The line between ordinary and holy thins to almost nothing. In 5 minutes, the trajectory of one half-belonging young man will tilt toward the ends of the earth. But first he must answer the same question you must answer. Are you ready to walk? Takeaway. Choose one small act of costly obedience in the next 48 hours. Send the message set. The meeting confessed the truth. Read Luke 14:27-28 and ask God to help you count the cost, then step anyway. Morning in Lystra arrives, like a soft drum pestles tapping grain goats, complaining sandals scuffing the lane. Inside a modest stone house, a kettle hisses, while sunlight pencils through a thatched seam. Here faith smells like warm bread. Lois' hair silvered by storms she never names, hums a psalm while kneading. Eunice threads a needle through a torn sleeve, lips moving with stories the boy has heard enough to finish. Ordinary chores, therefore ordinary chances to plant extraordinary truth. Timothy learns the cadence of Scripture at the table, not the academy. They fold law and prophets into breakfast, therefore his conscience grows tall before his body does. Lois recalls Moses arguing with fear, therefore courage becomes possible. Eunice sketches David's failures beside God's mercy, therefore repentance becomes a way home rather than a cliff. The boy doesn't argue. He absorbs. He listens the way parched soil listens, without noise, with hope. There is a shadow in the doorway that never quite leaves the Greek father, whose absence rearranged the rooms. The town whispers, but the women refuse to weaponize pain. Eunice will not salt a wound into bitterness. Lois will not turn biography into a cage. Some doors close. Eunice says, therefore, God opens windows you didn't know were there. They do not erase the ache, but they refuse to let it define the young man. He is not the sum of what walked away. He is the fruit of what stayed. Notice the curriculum: prayer before chores, psalms between tasks, kindness during interruptions. Lois watches how Timothy returns a neighbor's dropped basket and nods as if he aced an exam. Eunice teaches him to read the Holy Scrolls, then to read the room. Where is the person in pain, the quiet one at the edge, the visitor whose sandals are still dusty? He learns that hospitality is theology with sleeves rolled up. He learns that reverence has elbows. It gives, it repairs, it carries. At night, when the wind flosses the rafters and the lamplight shrinks, Eunice points at the stars and outlines promises handed down through Israel's long memory. We are a people of covenant, she says, therefore exile never gets the last word. Lois adds her weathered amen and tells the boy how God threads redemption through unlikely families. The lesson is not abstract. It is him. Mixed heritage but whole calling. Divided labels but devoted heart. He is the living proof that God's promises can grow in rough soil. Years later, a letter will name their influence. The sincere faith first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. But for now, there's no letter, only laundry and laughter and the long obedience of 2 women who refuse to quit. They are not famous. They are faithful. They do not chase platforms. They build a person. Their theology is durable because it can withstand spilled milk neighbor drama and market prices that won't behave. The gospel gains traction when it wears aprons. Timothy watches and copies. He learns to pray without performance, therefore prayer survives when crowds vanish. He reads the sacred stories until phrases fit his mouth. But he also learns the quiet ethics of sweeping the doorway and returning tools on time. When a friend mocks his seriousness, he smiles and keeps helping load a cart. He is not trying to be impressive. He is learning to be useful. Usefulness will matter later when an apostle asks for a companion who can carry weight without needing a spotlight. Do the women ever cry? Of course. On a day when the market insults run hotter than usual, Eunice's hands tremble as she folds a tunic. Lois takes over not with a lecture, but with a lullaby. They pray for Timothy's heart, that it remains soft, where the world hardens steel, where compromise seduces. They ask God to make him a bridge, not a barricade. Pain is acknowledged, therefore it does not rule. Fear is named, therefore it shrinks. Faith is sung, therefore it stays. The house becomes a seminary for resilience. When the synagogue debates not into legalisms, Lois teaches the difference between pleasing God and appeasing people. When Timothy recites a psalm by memory, Eunice smiles and then asks how it might shape the way he treats the boy who sells figs. Scripture travels from scroll to street. This is discipleship with dirt under its fingernails. What looks small washing feet sharing bread, yielding the last word, becomes the muscle memory of a life that can carry mission. There is no hint yet of the scarred preacher walking back into Lystra, only rumor from other towns that the message of Jesus is overturning chairs and healing hearts. Lois and Eunice sift the rumors into prayer. If the Lord calls, you will recognize his voice, Eunice says, not as a slogan, but as a plan. Recognition requires rehearsal. Rehearsal requires repetition. Repetition requires love. Therefore, even when the day is dull, they practice. Practice makes a doorway when a knock finally comes. And when that knock comes, when someone breathless appears to say, "The apostle wants to see you." The reason Timothy's knees can knock and his feet still move is here in this house. The women of this home have already taught him the choreography. Listen, weigh, obey. He will honor them not by staying safe, but by carrying their quiet strength into loud streets. The apron strings become anchor lines, therefore the boat can leave the shore. Takeaway. Build a kitchen table liturgy for the next 7 days. Pray before chores. Name one promise of God during a task practice, one small act of hidden kindness. Faith that feels small today becomes strength you'll need when the knock arrives. Market day swells like a tide. Figs shine like coins, linen snaps on a rope, metal clinks as a smith shapes a hinge. Timothy moves through the current with a shopper's basket and a student's eyes. Therefore he notices everything. The exchange rates, the murmurs, the way elders nod at him with approval that never quite lands. In the synagogue he reads clean praise, earnest serves willingly. But a phrase trails behind him like a loose thread, his father is Greek. It is not shouted, but it is heard. It is not a verdict, but it stings like one. He tells himself it shouldn't matter. God sees the heart, therefore he will keep his head down and keep doing right. Yet the label rubs raw. When a debate about tradition heats the room, an elder's glance slides past him to a boy with a more proper pedigree. When young men plan marriages and trades, one jokes that Timothy could pick either world Jewish enough for synagogue chores, Greek enough for marketplace deals. Laughter rises. Timothy smiles politely, but something inside him goes quiet. On his walk home, the joke echoes like a pebble in a jar. He passes Roman stones and Hebrew doorposts. The city itself a collage of languages, therefore his chest becomes a collage too. He thinks of the father, whose absence is a presence, the mother whose presence is a pillar, the grandmother whose voice can hush a storm of shame with a single psalm. He wants a name with no footnote belonging without explaining belonging. That evening, Eunice notices the way he folds his tunic precise, the way sorrow can be precise. She does not interrogate, she invites. "Walk with me," she says, and they circle the block while goats argue the sunset. Timothy speaks finally. Does God call divided people? Eunice breathes a small laugh. God doesn't call bloodlines, she says. He calls whole hearts. A cracked cup still carries living water when he holds it. Therefore the question shifts from pedigree to posture. You are not half to him, she adds. You are his. The words do not erase the ache, but they give it a place to rest. At synagogue the next day, Timothy reads a passage about exiles returning home. He does not recite it later. He carries it. The words become a lens. Perhaps home is not where everyone approves, but where God appoints. He unrolls the scroll and feels his pulse slow. He is not auditioning. He is apprenticing to the one who sees in secret. The room remains the same elders, same fumes of oil and old wood. But the inner weather changes. Belonging stops being a vote and becomes a vow. Still fracture fights back. On the road, a boy from the stalls asks if Timothy ever feels like two people in one tunic. Sometimes he admits, but not when I'm praying. Prayer therefore becomes his truest birthplace, the room with no walls where a boy with hyphenated history becomes a son with unhyphenated grace. He lets labels kneel before love. Lystra offers two educations, one in law and lore, and another in the coded language of looks. Timothy receives both. Therefore discernment grows. He can sense when a rule protects and when it merely polices. He can tell when tradition tastes like wisdom and when it calcifies into gatekeeping. He starts to bless the city he aches inside. At night he climbs the house ladder and lies under a sky scrolled with stars. He whispers his own line into the dark, "Make me whole for what you want." Not whole through pretending, whole through surrender. He rehearses a yes he has not yet been asked to give, because rehearsal makes recognition. Weeks slide by in ordinary loops, chores, scrolls, errands. Therefore restlessness hums like a distant drum. He learns to work while waiting to wait while working. He serves without stage offers, strong arms to lift crates, fetch water, fix a hinge. Integrity is its own passport. Though borders within him remain duty, makes a path across them. He refuses to despise the small path. Then rumor rides the wind, the scarred preacher has returned to these streets, the one who once bled on these stones and got back up singing. Timothy hears the reports and does not know whether to run toward them or away. His longing says go. His label says stay. He chooses the middle ground, the shade of a courtyard where he can hear without being seen. Words float over the wall like swallows. Jesus, grace, repentance, mercy for sinners, and a kingdom for outsiders. Outsiders. Some call the message dangerous. Others call it deliverance. Timothy recognizes both reactions because both live inside him. He does not chase eye contact. He chases God. If this gospel is real, therefore there might be a place where hyphens fall away and names ring clean. A thought rises he cannot stuff back down. Maybe my fracture is not a flaw to hide, but a bridge to build. He walks home different in a way no mirror could register, shoulders the same, eyes steadier. Lois makes a small noise that means I can tell. He tells them what he heard, not quoting sermons, but describing temperature, the fire in the words, the kindness in the rebuke. The way the preacher's scars made the promises feel expensive and therefore trustworthy. Nobody decides anything that night. They pray and sleep and keep the next morning's appointments. Faith often walks in regular shoes until calling buys the sandals. Timothy stacks kindling for the breakfast fire and feels the collage in his chest begin to align. He is still the son of a Jewish mother and a Greek father, but the sentence feels different. The emphasis has moved. He does not know that a question is already moving toward him through town on someone else's lips. Tell me about the young man. He only knows this if God speaks he wants to be close enough to hear and humble enough to answer. Takeaway. If labels have kept you small, write one sentence that reclaims them in prayer. Lord, use my dung as a bridge, not a barrier. Then practice one bridge act this week. Serve someone who stands where you often feel you don't belong. Night lowers, like a blanket stitched with small sounds. A dog rearranging itself in the alley. A clay cup settling on wood wind threading the thatch. Lystra goes dim. The arguments of the market evaporate. Timothy lies on his mat, palms open over his ribs, as if holding a book that isn't there. No torch, no scroll, only the long breath of a house that believes while it sleeps. He practices not speaking. He lets the day rinse off, therefore the residue of labels loosens its grip. He names what hurt and what helped. He thanks God for bread, for work, for the stubborn mercy of his mother and grandmother. And then he does the harder thing, nothing. He does not bargain. He waits. Silence is not empty to him. It is seeded ground. Waiting grows a certain kind of ear. In the hush, his thoughts stop sprinting long enough to be seen. He notices which fears are loudest at bedtime and which hopes survive until morning. He remembers stories Lois told men and women who learned to recognize God's nearness in quiet rooms before they ever stood in noisy courts. That is the pattern apprenticeship in obscurity, therefore courage in exposure. He whispers a simple prayer he learned by listening. If you speak, I will answer. He does not demand a timetable. He does not chase a sensation. He builds a habit stillness, first, questions, second, obedience ready. When he can't feel anything, he lingers anyway, convinced that fidelity before clarity is still faith. But silence also draws out the shadows. Old sentences knock on the doorframe, half belonging. Not enough. Stay small. He watches them come and go like travelers who do not know his address. The voices are persistent, but they are not kings here. He breathes slow, holds, releases 4 beats, in 4 beats, held 4 beats out, until his chest stops fluttering. In that rhythm, he remembers the core truth his teachers planted: calling begins in being, not doing. Therefore, he refuses to audition for God. He belongs before he contributes. He rests before he runs. The room does not change, but the atmosphere inside his ribs brightens a shade like a wick turned up. He waits long enough for hunger to become holy. Silence gives him back the world in detail. The rafter crack, the goat's soft complaint, the linen cooling on the line. None of it announces destiny, therefore all of it becomes rehearsal for it. He learns to notice without grasping to receive, without hoarding to surrender, without sulking. When neighbors' laughter leaks thinly through the wall, he chooses blessing over envy, one whispered prayer with their names on it. When tomorrow's errands stack in his head, he writes them in his mind and hands them to God. He is building the inner choreography he will need when choices arrive: fast, pause, pray, proceed. He does not know that listening now will let him hear a summons later without mistaking it for flattery or fear. In the mornings, the practice continues. He rises before the lane wakes, steps outside, and feels the air choose its temperature. He recites a psalm line he paraphrased into his own voice and lets it lace with the sunrise. He does one hidden good on purpose, fills an old neighbor's water jar before she asks, fixes a gate hinge without a receipt. Love sharpens hearing. Therefore, as obedience becomes ordinary, the extraordinary becomes easier to spot. Days fold open and close with this rhythm: stillness work, stillness. Restlessness remains, but it stops bossing him around. The ache is now an arrow. He does not know that somewhere beyond the ridge, a scarred apostle is already walking a road that will intersect his, and that the first proof he is ready will be the way he recognizes the question inside the man's eyes. Takeaway. For the next 48 hours, practice a 10 to 2-1 rhythm. 10 minutes of silence after waking, 2 minutes of silent prayer before any big decision, 1 hidden act of love each day. Listen first. Then step where peace and purpose overlap. Midday leans hard on Lystra. The road powders under sandals, shutters clack, a hawker fan's flies from figs that glitter like coins. At the gate, a small crowd forms the way. Iron filings find a magnet. Heads tilt, fingers point. A traveler approaches with the slow economy of someone who has learned to keep moving after being stopped. Cloak dusty, gait steady. Arms mapped with healed lines that don't ask for pity, only tell the truth. It is Paul. Once this town tried to crown him a god, then tried to kill him. The memory still lives in the stones. He does not walk like a celebrity returning for applause. He walks like a survivor returning for work. Rumor outruns him down the lane. He was beaten there, dragged there, preached there, bled there, rose there. Some step forward with wet eyes. Others step back behind safe opinions. A boy whispers that the apostles should be afraid. An old man counters that fear already had its turn. Paul's face is not grim, it's resolved. He greets by name where he can, nods where he cannot, and keeps moving as if an invisible line is drawing him through the market toward a particular doorway. Courage is not loud here. It is the refusal to relocate the mission to a gentler city. Timothy sees him before he hears him. From the shade of a lintel, the young man goes still. The way a deer goes still, not frozen focused. The scars do something to the air like a judge's gavel. They settle the argument about sincerity. Paul's shoulders carry more than a pack. They carry proof. Therefore, his words, when they come, will weigh more than the volume that carries them. Admiration builds in some faces. Suspicion hardens in others. The synagogue remembers arguments. The Romans remember disturbances. The merchants remember days when sermons slowed sales. The city is a chorus of mixed motives, but the solo that rises above it is simple. Here is a man who did not edit suffering out of his resume. He turns into a believer's courtyard, where lemon leaves shine and a clay lamp smokes. Greetings stack into a small tower hands. Squeeze cheeks, brush, tears, blink fast. Paul receives affection, then lowers the room to prayer. Head bowed. Few words. Long silence. He prays like a man who knows the recipe for courage. God's presence plus honest weakness plus a willingness to go again. When he lifts his head, the courtyard feels resized, as if the walls moved back an inch. He thanks God for those who endured, for those who repented, for those who started over. He does not congratulate anyone for being spectacular. He strengthens them for being faithful. Authority, therefore, tastes like service, not control. A woman asks if the rumors from other towns are true, that people who hated each other are sharing tables now that jailers are washing wounds. They didn't cause that. Widows are being named family. Paul answers like someone who still can't quite get over grace, yes, and more. But he refuses to sell the kingdom like a painless upgrade. He names the pattern they already suspect through many hardships. We enter life that is truly life paraphrased, not weaponized. The line lands like rain on roofs that have not seen a cloud for weeks. Hardship does not mean we are off the road. It often means we are on it. Timothy swallows. The sentence fits his bones. The courtyard swells at the edges as neighbors lean in pretending to need water. Children inch forward until their mothers hook them back by the tunic. Silas, travel-worn beside Paul, listens with the alert quiet of a man who has learned to be thunder's friend. They do not bring an entourage. They bring their history. You can hear metal clink faintly in the lane and imagine chains. You can smell bread and imagine prison midnight songs. The apostolic mood is not hype. It is heat. Therefore, even critics feel the room's temperature rise and cannot pretend indifference without effort. Timothy edges closer to the threshold ribs, hitching against an excitement he refuses to call that. The apostle's voice is not theatrical, but it is tuned for truth. He speaks of Jesus, crucified, risen, reigning, with a cadence that makes prophecy stand up straighter. He tells of households baptized, of sorcerers burning scrolls of a girl freed from a spirit that used her. He also tells of nights cold enough to bite bone and mornings when the only miracle was getting up. Paradox sits beside promise. This is not the sales pitch of a painless faith. It is the invitation to a costly freedom. Timothy's heart answers before his mouth does. Two teenagers fire questions as if Paul were a well. What about the law? What about the Gentiles? What about suffering? He does not dodge. He does not belittle. He threads answers with a needle called love and pulls the string through both sides. In Jesus, the promises to Israel are fulfilled. In Jesus, the nations are welcomed without becoming copies. Freedom is not a refusal to serve. It is the power to serve without fear. If the cross is the doorway, then the Spirit is the wind, and the road is for everyone who will walk it. Therefore, the only thing that disqualifies you is clinging to the thing that kills you. Outside, the sun lowers. Inside, faces glow with a second kind of light. Timothy's restlessness, long a hum in his chest, resolves into a note that fits the chord. He understands something without being able to say it. Yet pain has made this man gentle. Scars have made him safe. That is why people lean toward him even when his words cut. He is a surgeon who knows the scar he will leave because he wears his own. The young man does not know that before this day ends, the apostle will ask for him by name. He knows only this: he wants to be near a fire that doesn't burn people to prove it's hot. Take away test voices by scars and fruit, not volume. Ask, has this person paid a price without growing hard? Do people become freer and more faithful around them? If yes, edge closer and learn. Dusk sets a lid on the courtyard, turning the sky the color of a bruised plum. Lamps sputter alive. Children get shooed to thresholds. Paul stands where vine shadow rakes the brick, one hand resting on a beam, like he's steadying the message before he lifts it. When he begins, the courtyard doesn't rise to meet him. It goes quiet around him. His voice isn't big, but it carries the weight of someone who's seen the inside of both a synagogue and a cell. He doesn't start with arguments. He starts with a person. Jesus crucified because we all colluded. Raised because God refused to let our verdict be final. If death is the lock, then resurrection is the key turning in real time. He doesn't sell forgiveness like clearance merch. He names the ache everyone drags around but keeps disguising we broke trust with God and with each other. Therefore, we wear fig leaf strategies, comparison control, religious performance, sarcasm, numbness. He doesn't entertain shame. He exposes it to oxygen. We tried fixing ourselves, he says in his own words, but the law was never a ladder. It was a mirror. It told the truth about our face but couldn't wash it. Heads lower. Old men stare at their sandals like they've just remembered something. Timothy feels the sentence sit in his ribs, the way a key sits in a lock just before the turn. Then, the turn. Through him, Paul continues paraphrasing the hope that rewires the room. Real forgiveness is announced, clean record with God, not based on your sprint, but his sacrifice. Whoever trusts him is set right. He won't let the gospel shrink to a niche. He says it like weather. The good news is God's power to change anyone who trusts him. Therefore, nobody gets to pre-screen themselves out. The religious elders tense at that anyone. The weary and the quietly wild-eyed breathe easier at that anyone. Timothy watches both reactions and realizes the message is upsetting. For the same reason it is saving it dethrones every other throne, including the one in your chest. Paul doesn't shy from the hard parts. He weaves in stories, households where feuds turned into family tables, communities that burned the lies they had been renting their lives to. He speaks of a girl in another town who was treated like a tool by a spirit and by men. Freedom arrived, therefore profit left, therefore trouble started. He doesn't edit the fallout. Expect resistance, his eyes say. Expect joy anyway, his scars add. The pattern lands like iron on anvil: repentance, then renewal. Renewal, then pushback. Pushback, then perseverance. Perseverance, then deeper joy. It is not a hack. It is a cross-shaped road. Timothy keeps trying not to be the center of this. He's good at the shade, good at listening from the edge. But the sermon keeps bending toward him. When Paul talks about the law as a mirror, not a ladder, it touches that old classroom in Timothy's chest where he studied to become acceptable. When Paul says the nations are welcomed without being forced to become copies, Timothy feels his shoulders drop 2 inches. He is not hearing flattery. He is hearing assignment. If the gospel is for outsiders without making them insiders by imitation, then his mixed story isn't an obstacle. It's an on-ramp. He feels simultaneously seen and sent. Questions start flying because truth opens the windows, and people want to breathe. What about the customs our fathers kept? What about meals? What about the weak who stumble over small differences? Paul doesn't bulldoze complexity. He loves it into order. He names core things as core and keeps other things in their lane. We won't bind what God didn't bind, he says in essence, and we won't flaunt freedom where it trips a neighbor. Therefore, love becomes the traffic law no one can obey without the Spirit. It's not soft. It's surgical. Freedom without love is just a prettier prison. Lamps pop and sizzle. Shadows argue with the stone. Paul's closing movement is pure invitation without manipulation. He refuses the crowd's appetite for spectacle. He refuses the cynic's appetite for loopholes. He speaks to the single heart as if it's the only heart listening. Turn toward him, he says by paraphrase. Trust him. Receive what you could never earn. Then walk it out among each other, mercy leading truth, not trailing far behind. No music swells, no pressure games. Yet the air hums like a plucked string. Some cry, some calculate, some leave, some stay to pray. You can tell the difference between hype and holy by what people do when the speech ends. Timothy doesn't move at first because moving would confirm what he knows, and knowing will demand something. He catalogs the feeling, not the adrenaline rush of being noticed, but the steadier joy of being named. This gospel meets him at the exact intersection he lives on: Torah, house Greek father, synagogue approval side comments, clean conduct complicated lineage. It honors his history, therefore it does not idolize it. It levels the ground, therefore it raises him to stand. He looks at Paul and doesn't see a celebrity. He sees a signpost. The road of reality with God will cost, but it will be worth more than it costs. Afterward, the courtyard thins to clusters, questions here, hugs there, someone laughing through tears, like a person finally untied. Paul listens more than he speaks now. He hands out prayer like bread. He entrusts tasks to locals instead of building a brand around himself. Timothy notes every choice: power that shares, authority that serves, conviction that leaves room for conscience. The sermon was fire, yes, but the embers in the apostle's character keep the heat gentle and lasting. Words like that hit different because the life behind them won't let them cool to slogans. On the walk home, Timothy hears his mother's voice stitched inside the apostle's message: Lois's songs, Eunice's counsel the long night. Silences, therefore tonight's fire feels familiar, like a door he's been standing beside for years, finally opened from the other side. He doesn't say calling out loud because that word can swell like a balloon until it floats out of reach. He says yes without a speech. He goes to sleep earlier than usual because rest is what you do when marching orders are close. Somewhere, perhaps in this same neighborhood, Paul is asking a quiet question to a trusted believer. Tell me about the young man. Takeaway. When a message hits different test. 3 things: the gospel center, Jesus' finished work, the road shape, repentance and love, and the messenger's fruit service over spotlight. If all 3 align, respond, don't just admire. The courtyard is thinning when Paul leans toward an elder whose beard keeps secrets and asks the quiet question that feels like flint. Tell me about the young man. Not a title, not a resume, a name. The elder's eyes warm. He speaks of a boy who returns tools, remembers widows, reads clean praise without trying to sound taller. Another brother adds that merchants trust him with coin, that children track him like sparrows track a baker. A woman says he waits his turn to speak and gives his seat to strangers. The reports braid into one rope-tested character. Therefore, Paul listens harder. He is not recruiting potential, he is recognizing fruit. Around the edges of the crowd, a cousin of a cousin overhears the name and starts a small rumor rolling downhill. By the time it hits Timothy's lane, it has gathered leaves and dust. The apostle asked for you. The words slap against the doorframe like a palm. Eunice looks up from a pot. Lois stills her hands. Timothy is halfway to the well with an empty jar. The sentence catches him mid-step. For a heartbeat, he is younger again, the old ache, bright as noon, half this, half that. But the ache can't outshout the summons. He sets the jar down so he doesn't drop it, wipes his palms on his tunic, and answers the door. The messenger is breathless in the way good news runs. He asked your name, the neighbor says, as if that is miracle enough. Timothy swallows. Names have always been complicated for him. What people call you can bless or bruise. But to be called by someone who bleeds for what he believes, that rearranges the furniture in a man, he glances at Eunice, then at Lois. They do not project their dreams onto him. They offer their blessing over him. Lois's nod is a benediction. Eunice's touch on his sleeve is a permission slip. The house has been a sanctuary, therefore it becomes a sending place. Old voices try one more time. Not enough, not whole, not ready. But they sound like echoes now, not announcements. Timothy's feet know where to go before his head finishes debating. He steps into the lane, therefore the horizon steps toward him. He does not strut, he does not slouch. He walks like a person who knows that obedience is lighter than explanation. Children squint up at him as if he just grew. A vendor jokes that he will come back famous. Timothy smiles and promises to come back faithful. Fame is a wind. Faithfulness is a root. On the way, a friend falls into stride and whispers the questions that jump fences at moments like this. What will you say? What will he ask? What if you stumble? Timothy exhales. I will tell the truth, he says. If I stumble, I will keep walking. He remembers the nights of silence and the mornings of small obediences. Therefore, the unknown feels oddly familiar. The door he's approaching is simply the next doorway after 1,000 smaller ones he's already stepped through. He is not leaping a chasm. He is lengthening a stride. They reach the house. Conversation hums inside like bees in a jar. A shadow moves across the threshold. Silas, perhaps, or the elder with the kind eyes. The door opens and the room notices him without making a scene. Someone gestures there, and Timothy steps into the shade where Paul sits. Time doesn't stop. It focuses. The apostle's gaze doesn't weigh him down. It lifts him into the truth of who he is becoming. Timothy, Paul says, tasting the name like something important and ordinary at once. We've heard of your life, not we've heard of your talent. Not we've heard of your father, your life. Inside, Timothy threads gather. The unseen years click into place. Lois's psalms, Eunice's counsel, long walks, where prayer kept him company. The market jokes that taught him mercy. The synagogue side glances that trained his humility. Therefore, when Paul asks the only question that matters, are you ready to walk, the answer isn't born on the spot. It rises from storage. He doesn't talk first. He bows his head. He breathes the prayer he has been practicing. If you speak, I will answer. Then he looks up and says the smallest, truest word a calling needs, yes. But yes is never naked. It always carries cost under its coat. Paul honors the yes, and then names the tension waiting on the road. The communities they will serve include many Jews. Your Greek father will be a stumbling block for some. Love will ask you to remove barriers that keep people from hearing. The words are careful, but clear. Timothy feels the meaning before he maps it. Obedience will touch skin before it touches sermons. The request stings and makes sense at the same time. Love is the logic. Mission is the motive. Therefore, he does not argue with the why, even as he swallows the how. The room does a holy thing. It does not pressure. No hands shove him toward impressiveness. No one drapes him in titles. They give him space to count the cost because Jesus told honest people to do that. Timothy thinks of the widows he served, the children who track him, the elders who nodded, the neighbors who watched his life from 3 feet away. He thinks of faces he has not met yet, ears that won't hear if a preventable barrier stays in the way. He thinks of his father not with bitterness, but with clarity. He cannot change the past, but he can choose the kind of bridge he wants to be. He lifts his chin. I will do what love requires. A murmur of relief passes through the room like wind through leaves. Soft, grateful. Paul's eyes soften too, the way a commander's eyes soften when he recognizes courage that doesn't need trumpets. Silas clasps Timothy's forearm and squeezes once, as if fastening a latch. The elder with the kind eyes nods the nod that means, you are not doing this alone. Lois and Eunice will hear later, and there will be tears and prayers and silence heavier than words. But right now, the summons has become consent. The abstract has become embodied. The boy has become an apprentice of fire. They set a time for the private act away from spectacle. They pray short and mean it. Paul asks Timothy to walk home the long way, to let the weight settle, to let peace rise. The lane seems narrower and larger all at once, like the world grew while he was in the room. People are closing stalls. A dog noses a dropped crust. Distant thunder suggests rain that may or may not arrive. Timothy's steps are measured, not dramatic. He is not composing speeches, he is composing surrender. The yes feels both costly and clean, like cold water after a fast. At his door, he pauses. Eunice opens it as if she had her hand on the latch the whole time. Lois stands behind her with a look that says, so. He tells them everything without dressing it up. They do not gasp. They do not scold. They bless. 3 hands find each other and hold like sailors holding a rope in rising wind. Lois sings low a line he has heard since he had baby teeth. Eunice prays the prayer mothers pray when they put their sons into God's hands, not safe, but kept. The house that raised him releases him again. Therefore, the next time he hears his name, it will be alongside words like brother, co-worker, son in the faith. Takeaway. When your name is called, don't chase spotlight. Seek confirmation. Let trusted people speak of your life, not just your gifts. Count the cost with God. Then give a clear yes or no. Clarity honors everyone. The lane isn't long. 3 turns, a low wall, a courtyard with lemon leaves. That's all. But once your name is called, distance stretches like hot taffy. Timothy steps out, and the ground tilts by a degree only he can feel. Children pop seeds with their teeth. A rooster complains about everything. A cartwheel chirps for oil. Ordinary sounds, therefore nothing has changed. But everything has. He has rehearsed 1,000 small obediences. Now each footfall cashes them in. He wants to run, but he walks. Speed would be for show. Steadiness is for truth. Halfway down the first alley, the old chorus warms up. Not enough. Not whole. Not ready? It's amazing how lies memorize your lines. He lets them speak, but does not hire them as narrators. He counts instead. Breath in 4, hold 4, out 4, again. The rhythm quiets the courtroom in his chest. He prays with his rib cage. If you speak, I will answer. If you lead, I will follow. If I tremble, I will still move. He doesn't ask for an easier road. He asks for a stronger spine. Courage is not a mood. It's a decision repeating. Therefore, he repeats it with every step. A neighbor mistakes his focus for pride and cracks a joke to pull him back to average. Timothy smiles because average has been a safe house. But it's not home. He thinks of Paul's scars, evidence that conviction can survive rocks and keep loving people who threw them. He thinks of Eunice's hands steady on a sleeve. He thinks of Lois's songs gently louder than shame. Their faith has been the homework. This walk is the quiz. Therefore he refuses to cram. He lets the long practice carry him. He will not perform humility, he will choose it. If praise comes, he will deflect it to God. If reproach comes, he will absorb it without swallowing poison. Turn 2. A boy he knows from the stalls falls into step and whispers, "Aren't you scared?" Timothy doesn't fake the brave face. "Yes," he says, "but fear is bad at directions." The boy snorts, then sobers. What if he asks something you can't give? Timothy glances at a swallow stitching the air. "Then I'll say the truth." He answers and keep walking. Honesty is lighter to carry than image. Therefore he drops the weight he can't afford pretense prediction performance. His sandals rasp the dust. A dog watches him pass without deciding if he's friend or threat. That seems about right. When you leave categories, you unsettle observers who prefer them. At the low wall, he pauses. Not to stall, but to see. The city looks back with its layered faces, devout, cynical, hungry, guarded. He imagines people he has not met yet, grandfathers with careful questions, mothers with aches. They don't word kids who listen with their whole bodies. He realizes the ask ahead of him is not about being impressive beside Paul. It's about being invisible beside the gospel. Therefore the math changes. The cost he will be asked to pay will sit in his flesh, but it will purchase hearing for ears that otherwise close. Love is expensive, but it is not wasteful. He feels the yes rise again, not as hype, but as clarity. He takes the final turn. The doorway is now a rectangle of shade. Voices murmur inside. A shape crosses the threshold, Silas perhaps then recedes. Timothy's knees send a memo recommending retreat. His feet veto it. He runs a quick audit of his soul resentment, zeroed approval seeking dialed down, willingness solvent. He hears his name in his mind and doesn't flinch. That's new. He smooths his tunic not for vanity, but for dignity. Even servants can arrive tidy. He thinks of a line he paraphrased from Joshua, "Be strong and resolute," and puts the words in his mouth like a seed under the tongue. Strength will not banish trembling, but it will keep trembling from steering. He breathes once more. Then he steps into the shade that will ask him one simple, costly question. Takeaway: walk while afraid. Use this 3-step loop today. Pause for one deep breath, pray. One honest sentence, Lord. I'm willing, order my steps, proceed with one small action. Repeat at every turn until you arrive. Shade cools the room like a hand on a fevered brow. Dust hangs in the beam of a single doorway. Paul sits with travel in his shoulders and peace in his eyes. Silas leans against the wall the way veterans rest, never careless, never tense. A few believers hover then thin to the edges. Timothy steps inside and the floor remembers his sandals. No trumpet, no stage, just proximity. He bows his head first because humility is how his body tells the truth. Timothy. The name lands like a key on a palm. Paul says it as if it belongs to a future as well as a past. Your life. He lets the words stand on their own legs. Not your pedigree, not your father's story, your life. The air writes itself. Something in Timothy unclenches, therefore he can breathe. The apostle speaks of what he's heard: steady service, clean conduct, mercy without fanfare. Character is the first credential. Then Paul asks the question that turns days into decisions. Are you ready to walk? Not, are you extraordinary? Not, do you meet every expectation? Movement language. Road language. Timothy's mouth is dry. His heart is loud. Worthiness keeps flashing its fake credentials. He could say, I need more time. He could ask for a sign shaped like a guarantee. But he remembers the night practices of silence, the kitchen table liturgy, the long obedience of small rooms. Readiness is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of formation. Therefore, he answers the way, a door open, simple, deliberate, yes. Paul does not applaud. He affirms. If the Lord calls, he equips, he says in the humble certainty of a man who has seen the equipping arrive on the road. And not a moment sooner. Timothy hears it like water. Equipping does not mean ease, it means enough. It means strength when needed, words when given, patience when pressed, love when tested. He looks at his own hands as if they will have to learn new verbs: carry, comfort, confront, heal. He nods. Willingness outruns worthiness. But a yes without shape becomes wind. Paul gives the yes a direction. He explains the route ahead: synagogues, households, markets, places where Jewish neighbors will listen first and leave quickly if barriers remain. Timothy's Greek father will be a stumbling block for some. Love will ask him to remove whatever keeps ears from hearing. The cost is personal before it is public. The request is tender and clear. Timothy feels the flinch and the freedom at the same time. But he doesn't call it legalism. He calls it love. He learned this from Lois and Eunice. Sometimes faith empties your hands so they can hold more people. Silas adds a soft word the kind brothers give. We walk together. The room agrees without ceremony. The believers do not sell him on romance. They steady him for reality. No one promises an easy schedule and a famous name. They promise presence, God's first, then theirs. Timothy realizes he has been practicing for this with every unseen chore. Therefore, this step feels like a straight line, not a leap. Paul asks one more question, the one that checks the engine. Why do you want to go? Some men chase power, some chase escape, some chase an image of themselves preaching. Timothy searches the room for a lie and can't find one. Because the message is true, he says, and because people are heavy, and I want to help carry. Paul's laugh is a blessing. Motivation checked. Mission clear. Road open. Frame break. If you were in that room, what would you say? Would you list your disqualifiers like a grocery receipt? Would you negotiate a safer assignment? Would you tell the truth you want God more than comfort? When calling is real, it does not flatter your ego. It recruits your devotion. Calling doesn't need you impressive. It needs you available. Therefore, the question, are you ready to walk, becomes, are you willing to be led? They pray with few words. The silence does the heavy lifting. Timothy's yes takes root while no one watches. He feels smaller and stronger. At once the good kind of small that makes room for God, the good kind of strong that doesn't require a pose. Outside, sandals scuff a cart. Creaks, a child laughs at nothing. Inside, a young man becomes an apprentice not of fame, but of fire. Paul stands. The meeting ends without spectacle. Details will follow: where to meet, what to bring, whom to greet first, but the core has occurred. Timothy bows again and receives something more than permission, a place. Not mascot, not project, son in the work, brother on the road. When he turns to leave the doorway, looks different. It is no longer the edge of his life. It is mile marker 0. He steps back into the light. Lystra looks unchanged, lemon leaves, clay market dust, but everything has a new assignment. Pain will be repurposed into compassion. Heritage will be repurposed into bridge building. Silence will be repurposed into discernment on the fly. He does not feel taller. He feels truer. He will tell his mother and grandmother, and their eyes will carry both ache and pride. The yes will ask more of them too. That's how love works. It never bills only one heart. On his way home, Timothy rehearses no speeches. He reviews no imagined applause. He thanks God for the question that found him, for the voice within that, recognized it for the discipline that made a door inside him. Worth wrestles, but willingness wins. He carries this sentence like a pocket blade. If the Lord calls, he equips. He will need it again soon, because before the platform comes, the price. And before public ministry comes, a private surrender. Tomorrow will test today's yes. Tonight he sleeps like a man who finally knows which direction the road runs. Takeaway. When God's invitation finds you, answer with a clear yes or no. And if it's yes, anchor it with this prayer. Equip me as I go. Then take one immediate concrete step in the direction of that yes before the day ends. Night returns with its merciful hush. After the meeting, Paul asks for a quieter room. No crowd now, just Silas, an elder, from Lystra, Timothy, and the soft scrape of a stool across stone. Paul's eyes do the careful work of a shepherd who knows what love sometimes asks. He doesn't clear his throat for drama. He lowers his voice for dignity. The road ahead will run through synagogues, he says in essence. Many of our brothers begin there. Your mother is a faithful Jew, your father was Greek. That mixture will be a hurdle for some ears. If we can move the hurdle without moving the gospel, we should. Timothy understands the subtext before the sentence completes. He breathes once slow. He knows the scriptures. He knows that rescue in Jesus is not earned by rituals. He also knows people how quickly good news can be drowned by old arguments. This is not about earning favor with God. It is about removing static for the sake of neighbors. Freedom is not an exemption from love. It is the power to love more precisely. Therefore, the cost on the table is not a loophole, but a bridge. Paul does not coerce. He lays out the why not as a policy, but as a person-shaped plea. There are grandfathers who will listen if one offense is gone. There are mothers who will stay if one distraction is removed. There are boys in back rows who will stop smirking and start wondering. We become servants to win more is the feel of it, not a slogan to print, but a posture to live. Silas adds a single thread. We will walk this with you. The elder nods, grieved by the pain involved and grateful for the love it represents. The room holds the tension without flinching. Timothy counts honestly. Pain real, not theoretical. Privacy must be guarded, not gossiped. Identity, does this deny his father or dishonor his mother? He tests each fear against truth. This act won't purchase salvation. Jesus already did that. It won't erase his story. It will aim it like an arrow. It won't make him more Christian than yesterday. It will make him more reachable to certain ears tomorrow. Love is not vague here. Love has an address, and it lives on streets named Synagogue Lane and Family Courtyard. Therefore, love asks him to carry pain so others don't have to carry a stumbling block. He remembers the kitchen table liturgy, Lois's psalms, and Eunice's prayers, training him to distinguish people from opinions, mission from ego. He remembers the market jokes and how they taught him to bleed without becoming bitter. He remembers the night silences in which he promised God a yes shaped like obedience, not performance. He is not choosing against himself. He is choosing for the people he hopes to serve. Rights are real. They are also tools. He can lay one down to lift others up. He looks at Paul and sees no smugness No tally-keeping, only relief that love found a way that law never could. Frame break. Does this feel too much? Consider your own life. You have freedoms that are true but not always helpful. You can post the clap back, therefore you will lose the listener you might have won. You can keep a habit that isn't sin, therefore it blocks the very person you're praying for. Love does not chain you, it chooses for you. It selects the road that carries more people at the cost of less comfort. That's not legalism. That's leadership. That's Jesus-shaped liberty. Back in the room, no one rushes him. Timothy has timed away to pray, to let fear finish talking, so faith can answer last. He pictures faces he hasn't met yet. An elder who smells like olive oil, a widow whose hands flutter when she speaks, a thoughtful teen who mimics sarcasm to hide hunger. He feels the lift of purpose press against the bruise of cost. Pain first, so that hearing can happen. Dignity preserved, so that shame never gets a cameo. Prayer wrapped around it all so that the act stays worship, not theater. He looks up and anchors his yes in a sentence small enough to carry, "I will do what love requires." The room exhales the way a held breath finally remembers oxygen. Details are settled with care when who will be present, not to dramatize, but to protect. There will be no announcements. There will be no story time later. The point is not to perform sacrifice. The point is to remove friction. If love builds bridges, then this is a plank laid down in quiet. They pray, short, specific, surrendered. Paul's hand on Timothy's shoulder is light, not heavy. Silas's agreement is the strength of a brother, not the pressure of a brand. The elder blesses what he does not glamorize. Night holds their words and gives nothing away. When Timothy steps back into the lane, the stars seem unusually fixed, as if heaven approves the math love just did. He walks home with a sore kind of peace. He is not auditioning for holiness. He is accelerating the hearing of it. The platform can wait. The price cannot. Tomorrow, obedience will wear skin. Takeaway. Sometimes love asks you to lay down a real right to remove a real barrier. Ask 3 questions. Will this help someone here? Does this honor Jesus more than my comfort? Can I do it without shaming others or myself? If yes, choose the bridge. They choose a quiet hour before the city fully wakes. No crowds, no whisper chain, just a trusted elder. Paul, Silas, and Timothy. Doors latched, lamps low. The plan is simple: guard privacy, honor purpose. Move a barrier without moving the gospel. Paul prays first, not long, not loud, thanking God for mercy already given and asking for courage to love people more than comfort. Timothy answers with one sentence he can carry through pain: I am yours, use me for their hearing. Love is not a theory tonight. It is a decision with skin. There are no details for spectators because there are no spectators. The act is clinical and discreet. Pain arrives, therefore, breath becomes prayer. Timothy lets the ache speak and then lets surrender. Answer last. He thinks of synagogues where older men will lean forward instead of leaning away, of boys in the back row who will listen because the stumbling block is gone. The knife is quick. The purpose is patient. Tears come, but not the kind that's sour. When it is done, he is wrapped, tended, and left to rest. No boasting, no shaming, no story to trade, only worship that does not need an audience. Dawn tiptoes over the roofline. Eunice and Lois are there without fuss. They are always there without fuss. Their eyes hold ache and pride in a single bowl. They pray a mother's blessing and a grandmother's old song. The room receives it like bread. When Timothy stands with help, his face is pale and peaceful. He is not heroic. He is faithful. Pain speaks again, but peace interrupts. He whispers the sentence that carried him through the night. Not legalism, love. The community that knows the difference nods like fishermen who can read the current by the sound. Later, the brothers assemble without spectacle to lay hands and commission not to fame, but to service. The prayer names the pattern they expect: hardship, therefore endurance. Endurance, therefore joy. Joy, therefore testimony. Testimony, therefore fruit. Letters and decrees from the apostles are folded for the road. The real letter is written in a young man's obedience. He rests, then rises. The city yawns awake. Somewhere a rooster misreads the sun. Timothy takes a careful step. It hurts, but it holds. The first miles of his yes are ready to be walked. Takeaway: keep costly obedience private and prayer-soaked. Invite 2 trusted believers to cover you. Measure the cost with God, and let love, not pressure, decide. Treat pain as a teacher, not a headline. Let it deepen compassion for the people you're called to reach. Morning spills over Lystra like honey from a tilted jar. The lane smells of dust and bread. Packs are shouldered, sandals are checked. A few neighbors stand with shy smiles that say, "We're proud and we're scared." Timothy's steps are careful, but his eyes are bright. Pain remains, therefore joy arrives beside it, not after it. Paul knots the last strap on his bag, the way a craftsman finishes a chair, no flourish, just right. Silas tests the road with his staff and nods. There is no drum roll, only motion. Sometimes God's will sounds like feet. They head toward Derbe and Iconium, with letters folded tight, decrees from the Jerusalem elders' guidance to calm storms that rumor had swelled. The plan is simple. Deliver the teachings, strengthen the churches, encourage unity where suspicion used to live. Paul explains as they walk, we won't add burdens God did not add. We will ask love where pride asks to be right. Paraphrased, but clear. Timothy carries the satchel and the water skin. He is the newest in the band, therefore he is happiest to be useful. Apprenticeship begins with weight, not spotlight. The first day teaches him more than a month of theory. He watches how Paul chooses roads, sometimes the obvious one, sometimes the goat path that skims trouble. Therefore, wisdom is not stubborn, it is nimble. He watches how Silas keeps time rest, before collapse a hymn, before complaint a question, before an answer. When they meet a widow who insists on feeding them from a kitchen that looks allergic to abundance, Paul lets her instead of stealing her dignity with refusal. He pays with attention and gratitude. Timothy takes the plate and the lesson. Sometimes love receives, therefore people remember they still have something to give. At a small assembly, Timothy stands near the door as Paul and Silas read and paraphrase the message from the elders. Some tense jaws unclench. Customs are honored, consciences are kept. Gentile believers are not turned into copies. The room exhales. A father who had been holding his son at arm's length for fear of contamination pulls him in and kisses his hair. This is why we walked. Timothy thinks, feeling the ache in his side bow to something larger. He is not the hero of this moment. The gospel is. That realization makes his shoulders lighter. Trouble still looks for them. A vendor mutters that this faith ruins business for people who sell fear. A teacher scowls because authority he didn't control bypassed his seat. A boy mocks Timothy's careful stride and then reddens when Timothy asks his name and remembers it. Hostility tries to engineer a spectacle, but the team keeps the temperature low, serve, speak, move on. Timothy learns the paradox: strong truth and soft hands are not enemies. Therefore, even when opposition flares, peace doesn't have to evacuate the room. Evenings on the road are their own seminary. Paul tells stories with the humility of a man who knows he is not the main character. Ship decks and prisons, old friends and new churches, the 1,000 ways courage and kindness braid into something you can walk behind. He quotes scripture the way a carpenter handles wood, familiar, respectful, purposeful. Silas hums hymns that sound like maps. Timothy asks what he thinks are rookie questions, but Paul treats them like architecture. Good questions can hold weight later, so build them well now. They laugh more than Timothy expected. Joy isn't a break from mission, it's fuel for it. One afternoon, a man with neat beard lines and neatly arranged suspicions corners Timothy outside a meeting place. Why follow this Jesus? He asks, when you can be respectable without him. Timothy could recite answers. Instead, he remembers the mirror and the ladder and his own quiet nights. Respectable didn't make me whole, he says gently. He did? The man blinks, taken off script by a sentence with no swagger. Timothy does not win an argument. He plants a seed. Apprentices learn to prefer seeds over zingers. They deliver another letter, and another room warms. Pastors, relieved, stop policing each other's plates and start protecting each other's hearts. Communities that might have split down the fault line of custom and conscience choose a thicker cord love that limits itself so family grows. Timothy sees it. The decrees are paper, but they are also peace. He thinks of his own body, how removing a barrier created hearing. Now he watches a barrier leave a table and create belonging. The pattern is not abstract. It is embodied in him and around him. The road nods as if to say, see. On the third morning, soreness argues for a slower start. Purpose argues better. Paul notices and sets an easier pace without making a speech about empathy. Silas hands Timothy the lighter pack and a grin. No hazing here, only training. They pass shepherds who wave with a type of hospitality that doesn't check creeds first. A child runs alongside for a dozen paces and asks if they have any songs. Silas laughs and teaches a chorus easy enough for feet to remember. The kid's voice chases them up the hill like a sparrow. Timothy files this away. Sometimes evangelism sounds like a song a child can keep. They sleep one night in a courtyard where the stars fling themselves across an inky bowl. Timothy rolls onto his back and reviews the day, like a scribe with a joy problem. He thanks God for a body that hurts and holds for a mother and grandmother whose prayers travel farther than any camel for a mentor whose scars make safety honest. He doesn't feel like a legend. He feels like an apprentice of fire carrying flame, not becoming it. Learning heat, not hoarding it. Tomorrow will bring another courtyard, another conversation, another test. Therefore, tonight's prayer is simple. Equip me as I go. When they reach the next town, the report is the same. In a dozen dialects, churches strengthened, faith, stabilized, numbers quietly growing like wheat. Nobody noticed yesterday. They don't chase crowds. Crowds sometimes find them. They don't collect admirers, they form family. Timothy stands in the doorway again, not to hide, but to spot the one at the edge who looks like he used to feel. He will carry water again, fold a letter again, remember a name again. He is not too important for small things. Small things are how God trains people for large love. Episode 1 closes with road dust on his feet and a yes that is now plural. Yesterday's yes, today's yes, tomorrow's yes. The platform can wait. The first miles are the point. Takeaway. Begin like an apprentice. This week, choose one person to serve quietly. Carry one small weight that frees someone else, and ask one honest question of a mentor. Don't chase platform, stack faithful miles.